this is actually really predictable. We shouldn't be surprised at it, but it's worth noting. So the Israeli government has released footage of the tunnels under the hospital in Gaza and elsewhere showing not just the tunnels, but the evidence that the hostages were there. And they've also released security camera footage of the hospital in Gaza from October 7th showing Hamas brought the Israeli hostages into that hospital. A doctor who fled Gaza, who worked at that hospital, has now come forward and said that the bottom floor of that hospital was off limits, the basement level, that only Hamas was down there, and that, yes, Hamas used it as a base of operations. You will not be surprised to learn that the way the left is spinning this is that, well, clearly Hamas cared about the hostages and brought them to the hospital for care. I mean, all the Israeli video coverage shows is that Hamas cared for the hostages. You mean they took hostages? They definitive proof they took the hostages, and the left spin is, well, they clearly cared for them. They took them to the hospital, to the basement level where no one else was allowed to go. And by the way, Hamas denied they took them there. The way the left wants to twist this, always ad infinitum, to justify Hamas is ridiculous. A group of left-wing anti-Zionist Jews, that is self-loathing Jews, at the U.S. Capitol had a little ceremony this weekend. Now, I'm going to play you this, and you should understand, like one of the rabbis, and I should use air quotes, rabbis as a transgender activist, among other things. I'm going to play you this. If you're Jewish, if you understand Hebrew, you're going to get a real kick out of this. The rest of you aren't going to be able to understand it, but I will tell you what's going on here. Once you hear it, listen to this. Notice how her voice keeps fading. Let me read you the passage. Now there was a famine, this is from Genesis 26. Now there was a famine in the land besides the previous famine in Abraham's time, and Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines in Gerar. The Lord appeared to Isaac and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land where I tell you to live. Stay in this land for a while, and I will be with you and will bless you. For to you and your descendants I will give all these lands, and will confirm the oath I swore to your father David. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and will give them all these lands. And through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed, because Abraham obeyed me and did everything I required of him, keeping my commands, my decrees, and my instructions." So Isaac stayed in Gerar. So what this lady is saying out loud is, now there was a famine in the land besides the previous famine in Abraham's time, and Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines in Gerar, and the Lord appeared to Isaac and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land where I tell you to live. Stay in this land for a while, and I will be with you and will bless you." And then mumbles, "For to you and your descendants I will give all these lands, and will confirm the oath I swore to your father Abraham. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars of the sky, and will give them all these lands." So she says very loudly, sings the part of "stay in the land of the Philistines," and then mumbles so that it's almost inaudible to the people listening, "I will give you these lands." It's almost, oh my gosh, I can't read this part where the Lord says he'll give the Israelites the land. Nope, can't read that part. The level of willingness of these people to twist words and refuse to confront what their own eyes show them to justify the Hamas cause is outrageous. Now, there's something else happening. While all of this is going on, while the bad guys do everything they can to justify being on the side of the bad guys and trying to make the bad guys look heroic, there's been a surge in attacks on U.S. forces in the Middle East. People at the Defense Department, soldiers at the Defense Department, uniformed officers at the Defense Department are beginning to speak out on background to the media because they believe, in the words of the Washington Post, that they have a, quote, incoherent strategy for countering the Iranian proxies believed responsible, acknowledging the limited retaliatory airstrikes approved by President Biden that have failed to stop the violence. One defense official who, like others, spoke on condition of anonymity to be candid, said, "There's no clear definition of what we are trying to deter, and we are trying to deter future Iranian attacks like this. It's clearly not working." Let's go back to the polling from Fox News. Republicans have a dominant and commanding position on which party is best to handle national security and which party is best able to handle terrorism. When you go back to the 1980s and Ronald Reagan beating Jimmy Carter, it wasn't domestic policy on which Reagan won. We on the right, we like to champion that. We like to say, are you better off now 4 years than you were 4 years ago? I mean, the economy played a big role in Reagan's election. We can't deny that. But what also played a big role? The Iranian hostage crisis and the Soviet Union. Jimmy Carter was a disastrous president when it came to foreign policy and the economy. And Ronald Reagan made people feel safe. In fact, the polling suggested Reagan made people feel so safe that the Democrats and some Republicans attacked Reagan, saying he was going to lead us to nuclear war. He was going to lead us to nuclear war. In 1984, Ted Kennedy went to Moscow and tried to get the Soviet Union to make peace talks and kissy face to help Walter Mondale. That's right. The media doesn't like to talk about foreign interference in the election when Democrats do it, but Ted Kennedy, it is well documented, went to Moscow and tried to get the Soviets to interfere in the American election through changes in policy and public statements so that the Americans would feel more comfortable with the Soviet Union, because Kennedy was convinced if the Soviets would play nice with us, people would stop backing Ronald Reagan, who made them feel safe. You can say a lot of things about Donald Trump, but the Russians did not invade Ukraine when he was president, and Hamas did not attack Israel when he was president, and Iran left us alone. Joe Biden has an incoherent foreign policy. But it's really worse than that. There's something creeping in the shadows. There's resurgent Islamic jihadis creeping in the shadows. They are a threat to everyone. They are a threat to the Chinese. They are a threat to the Russians. They are actually even a threat to the Iranians because they're Sunni and they hate the Shiite Muslims as much as they hate the Christians and the Jews. They are a threat to us. But the Chinese and the Iranians and the Russians have basically set out a détente position with the Islamic jihadists roaming and growing in Africa and the Middle East, because they know they'll come for the Americans first, because they hate us the most, because we side with Israel, because they do view us as a Christian nation, even though we're really not. The threat is growing and festering. The Wagner mercenaries of Russia are helping the Islamic jihadists destabilize Africa. The Iranians and Syrians are attacking American positions in Syria and Iraq. The Chinese are buying the oil of the Iranians to fund the attacks. The Iranians are supplying weapons to Russia to combat the Ukrainians. The Turks are turning on us. The Turks have been a NATO ally. They're turning on us. And Joe Biden is too ignorant to figure out what to do. Joe Biden refuses to be aggressive. Joe Biden seems to think the world is going to like us. Don't forget, his administration has been infested with Iranian sympathizers. We know this. This has been documented by the press, not by me. There are things stirring in the shadows. There are things growing in the shadows. There are things festering in the shadows. And Joe Biden and his administration are asleep at the switch. It's pretty damning indictment of this administration that his own administration and uniformed officers are beginning to talk on background to the Washington Post that Joe Biden's strategy in the Middle East is incoherent. And what it's doing is it's provoking more aggressive attacks from the Iranians as the Iranians try to probe, where is the bright line with the United States? Thus far, there's not one. They can hit us and 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 hit us, and Joe Biden won't allow us to do an aggressive response, which means every time the Iranians hit us, they punch harder and harder and harder and harder and hit us and hit us and hit us, and Joe Biden won't do anything, which is going to provoke, one, a bigger Iranian response that ultimately does provoke an American response. We could have contained this when it was small, but Joe Biden refused to, which guarantees escalation, which is deeply incoherent as an administrative policy, but that's what you get with an 81-year-old in the White House surrounded by a bunch of progressives who think America is to blame for all the world's ills. Blame America first in the White House, get American deaths in the Middle East. It's that simple.